Where
Που,
are you?
που είσαι. Που είσαι.
So in Greek, where is mainly translated as pou.
Που.
For example, if you want to ask, where do you live? You will say, poumenis. The construction is
που
the same as
που
in
μένεις.
English. The question word followed by the verb.
Που μένεις.
This word can be very useful when trying to find your way around.
Oh, I can't speak Greek. I've never spoken Greek. From the moment that I was born, I understood that if you wanted to survive in this country, you needed to speak English. So if language is the cornerstone of identity, then I am of English and Irish stock. But I'm Greek. I'm 100% Greek. Grandparents, all sides Greek. Actually, just a couple of years ago, my mum bought me for Christmas one of those DNA ancestry kits. You know those ones? It's a really weird present. But I reckon mum was just trying to figure out whether dad had been fooling around, right? Anyway, so I took that kit and evidently I'm not 100% Greek. I'm 68% Greek, 26% from the Caucasus and 6% Eastern European Jewish, which must explain my 6% circumcision. If Dad hadn't been fooling around, then somebody surely was, right? But it also, 68%, it actually might explain why I'm such a lousy Greek. Now, in my 20s, I went travelling to the UK and Europe for a year and a half. You know those tours and trips you do when you're young. And I found myself working in a hotel in London. You know, I reckon it was 1 star if it was lucky. And it was staffed by everyone except Australians. And one day, a budding Australian hypnotist came in and we convinced him to put on a show for all the staff and all the guests. I mean, this kid was the real deal. I mean, before long, he had people running around like chickens, people eating onions as if they were apples. And he sewed like a code word into one of the guests that he would trigger long after the show was over. Well, anyway, the show ended and we went to the bar and we're all just sitting there waiting for him to throw the code word in, and he drops the code word and the guest leaps to his feet and screams, "Mummy, Mummy, I want a pee-pee," and goes running out of the room. I mean, it was hilarious. I mean, I thought, this guy is brilliant. So I'm going to get him to hypnotise me to try and find where my Greek language that I spoke as a child is hidden. You see? Because basically I'm lazy and I wanted a shortcut to a second language. Anyway, he's hypnotising me for hours and probing and looking and going really deep, trying to find out where I'd hidden my Greek language, but to no avail. So the next day I ring my mum and I said, "Mum, talk to me about, you know, when I used to speak Greek and what did I do when I was a kid?" And she said, "You never spoke Greek as a child. You refused to speak to us unless we spoke to you in English. You were a painful child." Anyway, maybe we should go back to the beginning. Yeah, that's exactly where we should start. Hi everyone, my name's Catsi. George Catsi, yeah. Look, you all know me actually because you probably work with me, and if you don't, you would have just sort of seen it on the schedule and the seminar, and actually Damien just said my name. So anyway, here I am, you know, and great, thank you all for coming. I know you had no choice and you're paid, but that's beside the point. But what you actually don't know about me is that my mum hated the name George. I mean, why would you do that? Why would you name your son George if you hated it? You see, she went against Greek tradition and refused to call the first son my brother after the paternal grandfather, George. And she named him Emmanuel and gave him the middle name Michael that he actually uses today. Well, can you imagine? My grandfather was insulted and he refused to speak to her for 6 months, which she actually said wasn't such a bad thing, right? So look, I remember my grandfather as this tall, thin Cretan man, 6'2". He didn't speak much, but he was a master of facial directions, Greek style. "Papu, would you like a cup of tea?" And he would tilt his head ever so slightly and his upper lip would curl. "Papu, I'm busting to go to the loo. Is the toilet up here?" Papu, when people say they don't understand things, they say it's all Greek to me. Do the Greeks say it's Chinese to me? I actually never knew whether he was saying yes or no. So needless to say, when I was coming along, the pressure was on my mum to write this heinous naming crime. But she had other ideas. She wanted to name me Timothy or Theodore after her father. I mean, what was she thinking? So I'd been born, and with the drugs still circulating around my mother's head, my dad put the paperwork under her nose and made her sign it. Her defences were down. He made my name George and didn't give me a middle name so I wouldn't revert to it. My brother got one and my sister got one. I was stuck with George. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe I could revert to my mother's maiden name, but her surname was George, and I would have been George, right? But look, at this point, I'm thinking, look, let's just run a little survey, because I think you kind of know me. You've got a sense of me. You're looking at me going, oh, who's that guy with the hair and the bloody eye that he's got at the moment? What name do you think I should be called? And people online, you can sort of, put an emoji up or something. So I'm just going to call out. So when I say a name, I want you to shout out if you think that's the name I should be called, if you think it works. Okay, so who thinks I should be called George? Hey. One positive and a few so-so. How about Timothy? No, well, that's still technically shouting out when you say no, but it's all right. It's simple instructions, right? Just call out. Yes, no, but make a noise, it's cool. How about Theodore? Wow, okay, geez, this is really... So how about none of the above? Yeah, okay, so all right, so you're a bit soft on George, Timothy's out, Theodore's out, none of the above. Any suggestions then? If it's like, what else, what should you call me? Give me a name, anything. Alexander, that's a nice one, Do you know I actually did this once and someone called out Kevin? Kevin Catsi. Can you think about that? Your cat's name is Kevin. Well, actually, my surname's Catsi, so it's like, there you go, Kevin the Catsi. But look, it's just a name. I mean, to the Greeks, what does it matter? Like a lot of wogs who came to this country, they had to shorten or change the surname to make it easier for all you uneducated Australians to be able to say it. But my family made an art form of it. You see, the original family name is Catsi with a K. The Arcus says that we're actually from Crete. And somehow when they got to Australia, it became Catsi with a C. But you see, this is where the twist comes. So they shortened it, and my father took Catsi, and his brother, my uncle, took Larkus, right? Yeah, that's right. Nothing gets wasted in our family. Okay. So, but to look, even after that, not long after that, my dad, for ease of business, wanted something a little bit more Anglo. So he changed his surname to Kent. Evidently, after when he went to the accountants, it was after the packet of cigarettes sitting on his table. I've thrown myself here. That was sitting on his table. So let's just have a little recap. Okay. So my grandfather over here is Catsi with a K. My original birth certificate is Catsi with a C. For my whole life, I've been Catsi. My brother and all my cousins over here are Larkus, and there's my dad on the left, and he's Kent. We should all be Catsi with a K. When I was growing up, we couldn't find our name in the paper phone book. Remember those phone books you used to get with all the names in it like that? We couldn't find our name in it until somebody came across it under S, Satsi. I took singing lessons in my 20s because my friends used to call me George Flatsy. Kent could have been worse. The accountant used to smoke Camel. In my 20s, I actually seriously, genuinely thought about changing my first name to Jackson. Jackson Catsi. I'm so glad I didn't, And I've actually, I've kind of grown into the name George. But maybe I could change my surname to Makakis. George Makakis. Nah, that's a ridiculous name. So what you're hearing at the moment is an excerpt from a show that I wrote and performed, and I'm about to do it again very soon, which was called Am I Who I Say I Am? Okay. So when I was invited to talk about story and personal story, I went, you know what? I think I got this, you know? Because I've had to think a lot about it and ask myself the question, like, who am I? Who am I? How do I exist? Who am I in the world? How do I operate? And I started to question a lot of things about my own story. There's some good stories in there, so I started to do a bit of memoir work. So for those who've ever done memoir, ask questions of their family and how do you tell a story, I was originally using writing, but I'm a performer, so inherently I started to embed myself in the story. So I think if we reflect back on what Glenn and Jane said, so there's the self, there's the actor, and then there's the character. So what you've just seen is me embodying all three. So there's me trying to be the performance of myself to create the character. So is that character here on the stage, is that really me? Don't know. Maybe it is, but it's heavily informed about who I am. And it's a medium of expression. So the self-referential nature, I think, of writing and of story, I think is hugely important. And I often call it the method of me. So it's a methodological process where you're trying to interrogate what you do, but you actually recognise the prism through which you're seeing things, which is you, and all that you've done and who you are and what you bring to the story. So am I who I say I am? So when it comes to storytelling, and I speak to all of you individually, are you who you say you are? So when you're looking for ideas and you're finding a medium and you're finding a way and you're finding the language, whether it's visual or verbal, to communicate that idea, how much do you actually recognise that the prism of you is filtering what you see as a good idea, what you see as a bad idea, the bits that you leave out as you're trying to make the perfect story? And I think it's important to recognise that. And what I've learned in teaching is that one of the best ways to communicate process is to tell the story of my process. It's not some sort of narcissistic teaching sort of thing. It's a way for students to gather information about how things have worked for you. So you have to find a way to process your creative process and then tell the story of you in that process and the framework from which that exists. And in the end, what I found, and this is my own personal experience, is students lean in, right? Because they want to hear about your experience. And importantly, they want to hear when it didn't work. And something I've learned from teaching, and as Dan was saying, I've actually learned to speak. I was a bit of a shy, retiring type. No one believes me. I was. Maybe I wasn't, but I think I was. And I sort of learned how to speak through improvisation, similar to Glenn, bringing myself forward and failing miserably in front of people. And I just think that's the most interesting performer you'll see, is the one who fails miserably and beautifully in front of people, but keeps on going and just brushes it off. You know, when things go down, the screen goes down, it just doesn't bother them. It goes, oh, whatever. Anyway, they'll talk you through it, the PAs, whatever it is, and they go through. Because what I've realised is that our flaws are far more interesting than our successes, right? And I love telling students this and everyone I teach. Perfection is boring, right? Perfection's boring. No one wants to hear about how perfect someone's life is and how they got it right. They want to know about how you got it right after you realise you were getting it wrong. You have to connect perfection with failure to understand the cycle. So when you teach, it's about that cycle of creation and death, creation and death. So in the creative industries, and what most people don't understand is that we're creating and dying every second, okay? Every second is a story to tell about our choices and our decisions that we make, about why our brushstroke goes there, why we choose this word, a songwriter agonising over where the word goes, the pause, is there a middle 8? Is there a middle 6? Mix it up. Why go middle 8 all the time? You know, the order of things and our choices with that. And that's the interesting thing, and that decision-making that goes with that. So I can't even see what's next. So I'm just going to ask these sorts of questions because I tend to frame things through this prism, and I try and get all my students to do that. And remember, I suppose if you don't know, the master's program is what I call creative agnostic. So we take students from all disciplines. So, from animation to, short filmmakers, to feature film screenwriters, to audiobook creators, to someone who did a visual arts installation work there using AI, which was interesting. Music, people writing songs, creating albums, blah, 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 or it goes on and on. So really, as the master's teacher, I can't be hooked on technique, and it's so liberating, right? Because the student gets hooked on the technique. I'm not going to teach you how to do that. You go and figure it out, right? But let's talk about the story. So does identity and worldview matter when it comes to story? I think it does. I think it's something you need to flag and recognise, and it doesn't always need to be on the surface, and sometimes it needs to bubble up, and you need to communicate it. But if you can get a handle on who you are, and I'll run through some things in a moment, it might actually help in your ability to communicate what's going on. Because every time we get up, everyone goes, oh, I don't like public speaking. And I say, but you're teachers and you get in front of students all the time. I said, that's public speaking. Oh, I don't like public speaking. I said, have you ever sort of sat in a coffee shop with someone you don't know very well? They went, yeah. I said, that's actually public speaking. Public speaking's one-on-one. Your ability to communicate a story is a one-on-one experience, 1-on-2, 1-on-5, 1-on-20, digital across 1,000, bring it back. It's the same person. So the more you know who you are, it actually frees you up. You don't have to be perfect. You just got to tell the story. So are stories with a through line to the creative better? Well, that's a question. Okay. I actually created a whole course for this New South Wales Writers Centre because I went to see an author talk. I won't say who they were. I was really interested in them. I really liked their books. I went to the author talk and I walked out and I didn't buy the book and I don't want to read the books again, right? Purely on the author's ability to destroy any interest I had in them by being the most uninteresting person I'd ever met, right? They got up there and they didn't really talk about themselves. They just talked about, they read from the book badly, right? They didn't really contextualize anything. I didn't care about them reading from the book. I can read the book better than they can, right? I wanted to know about them and I wanted to know why they made their choices. I want to know the struggles they went through. And then they can read an excerpt and contextualise this. Tell us the story of the story. How did you get there? What did you want? Did you reach what you wanted? Don't be down on it. Just kind of tell us what happened. I think when I can connect with the author, the creator, the musician, the songwriter, and they sort of tell me what they want, and you can connect it to their journey. I hate that word, but it kind of is, because I always ask students, they go, this is what I want to do, and I always say, yeah, but why do you want to do that? What do you want? Who are you? What do you want to be? What's your story? And I've been doing student admission interviews, and they come in and they're trying to tell me stuff, and I go, yeah, that's cool, but what do you want to do? What have you done? They go, I've done this. Okay, that's cool, but what do you want to do? What's in your mind? What's the story you've got going around in your head? How can we help you get there? Because you're saying you want to do this, and they suddenly scratch the surface and they go, actually, but yeah, I really want to do that. I go, yeah, well, then let's do that. Because that's actually going to be something that engages you. But that's hard. And they go, but that's harder. I go, yeah, but that's why you're here. So how much does the story of the storyteller frame the story being told? How many times can you get story into one sentence? How does this transfer to teaching creativity, which is what I'm speaking about here? So I'm just going to reflect back a little bit. I think you need to know who you are. And the more you put yourself up to the mirror and look at yourself and go, who am I? What's happened to me? What are my experiences? What's the story of me, and how can they bring that to it? So I'm glad that Jane and Glenn framed the start with a photo. So you've got to understand a few things. Here's a few things to think about, our cultural frame. Obviously, I've framed that story about me as in this Greek context and my failure at it. Terrible Greek. But there's a framing there. But it exists within me. I denied it probably for the first 25 years of my life until I realised, actually, you know what? There's probably good bits in there. And there's great bits. Our cultural frame. Our family and what position we sit in. I think our reference to our own existence and our own family is really important. What motivates us? What drives us? Are we moving towards something that our parents kind of had a vision for us, or are we running away from it, trying to create? I want to be an actor, but I wanted to be an architect. So you run away and you move yourself to somewhere else. So there's this tension that exists. and how your relationship with you are with your family. So which one's me? Me, the cat. Me on the far right. Is that right? You're saying I'm a nationalist arsehole. Is that what you're saying on the front? Is it this guy or this guy? That one? Nah, it's this one. Yeah. That's me at 8. I had long, sort of blondish hair and I was a bit chubby. Anyway, puberty, what a great thing. And that cat was called Pussy Catsi. Sounds like a porn star. Our ability to reflect back with distance and humour. I love this photo because it's so ugly. Well, I mean, look at that. That's just so bad. Puberty's cruel, right? And that, look at that 70s, I'm dating myself here, but that 70s wallpaper. There's my mum, look at my sister, there's my brother. But what it is, you've got to look at that and you've just got to go, oh, geez, I made a mess sometimes. Geez, I looked bad. And you put it out to the world and people will come with you. They'll join you on that because you're not just showing perfect photos, okay? You're not showing us where you're at your best, like those Instagram shots. The best ones are when people are looking a little bit crappy, you know what I mean? And they laugh about it and go, have a look at this. Look at me when I fell over. How hilarious is that? An ability to reflect on our choices. So you've got to look back at what you've done, what brings you to where you are today. What's your story? What's the story of what you've done? No, they're not my twin babies that I had at birth and gave away to be adopted. No. That's me as a nurse. Those who don't know, I used to be a registered nurse. That's the first thing I did, okay? And I was working in maternity and I've still got that dated haircut. Jeez, I've got to do something about it. Far out. But yeah, that's something I've done. And I realise it actually informs everything I do. Because to be a nurse, you actually have to ask people their story. What's wrong with you? Why are you here? Where are you from? Where do you live? And I started to learn if you just scratch the surface and you have an inquiring mind, you get people's stories. What you will hear from people is that they go, oh, I've never done anything, I'm boring. And I go, oh, yeah. You married? Yeah, okay, so you fell in love once. Yeah, how did that go? Oh, where'd you meet? And they go, and they start to tell you the story. I said, you've got stories coming out of your ears. What are you talking about? Ordinary people telling extraordinary stories is really interesting, right? Extraordinary people boiling themselves down to ordinary is really interesting. Extraordinary people telling you how extraordinary they are is boring, right? Ordinary people telling you how ordinary they are is pretty boring as well. So you want to get that mix. Who we aspire to be. For a while there, I thought George Michael could have been a role model. That's me. He's Greek, okay? He's there. He's handsome. That could have been me. Big problem. I can't really sing, but I learned how to. And then who we become. I got into a satirical act of cabaret and I learned how to sing on stage, right? That's me a while ago doing satirical comedy, right? So it's who we become. But I think vulnerability is really important here. People who are vulnerable and show parts of themselves where they're at their low point, and that is really interesting. I found these scratchings in some journals of mine. I'm dating myself a bit here. There was one I found, it says, I'm not a genius. I'm 45 and I'm still not a genius. It's like, I didn't feel very smart. I felt like I hadn't kind of learned stuff. It was kind of particularly low point, mid-40s. And this one here, 2004, I don't feel funny anymore. It's that sense of losing those creative elements, those driving forces. I think we've all felt it at times where you feel like you just don't have it anymore. It's just not there. And it's gone. It's those dark, low times. They're really interesting parts of your story because there's how you got there, what you did before that, and how you got out of there. Or maybe you're there. And even being there is interesting, but acknowledging it. Those who show vulnerability are more likely statistically to connect with their audience. You hear it in songwriting, you hear it in story, you hear it in film, you hear these great stories. And it's that ability to connect to the human experience. I think it's important. In animation, it's about having a character that's a rock, and that rock makes the audience cry, right? That's storytelling. That's the human condition. As storytellers, how much of us needs to be in the story? Well, I think that's a question. That's an open question. Probably not every time, but you're there anyway. You are there anyway. So sometimes there's referential stuff that's in it. You're somehow reflecting back on some experience. Lots of people do. Every single songwriter will tell you about the love that they lost. They seem to, or got, and then they lost. They never seem to be able to keep them long term. I'm in a long-term relationship. It's been 40 years, That's a great song. Maybe not. Maybe it won't sell. Don't know. So as storytellers, how much of us needs to be in the story? I think as teachers of people who are telling stories, we need to be a lot of us in the story. So you need to bring yourself in. Don't be afraid to bring yourself in and talk about the process of how it worked. Always in relation to their experience, not just yours. So you're bringing it to their experience, and they got courage to sort of step forward. So that's me. That's me in a nutshell. Well, it's not really. It's more like a little walnut, really, I suppose. That is a nut, though, isn't it? So story's important. Performance of story is important when you teach you're performing, right? Don't forget that. It's a show. It's not really you. It's a bit of you, but it's you as teachers. When you get on stage, it's you as teachers. What you have to do, and this is something I teach a lot in these other speaking courses that I do, I get a lot of creative people who come along, is they really struggle to tell their own story, right? They want to play it down. It's kind of this thing. So it's this balancing act between not playing it down and not overinflating it, but talking straight and delivering it. And as a final word to that, start at the beginning, start with something interesting rather than saying, someone asked me once, how do you not tell a story about yourself? Here you go. Well, I was born in 1962 in Crown Street Women's Hospital on a Monday, 3rd of September. I think my mum caught the bus there, she told me. Anyway, she went into labour about 7 a.m. and then she said she got a cup of tea first. And then, you know how boring that is? It's a really boring story, you know, because you're telling all the details in linear fashion. It's not how creativity works. Jumps straight into the moment. So, any questions about me or Damien, you can open up to the floor. Any questions? Comments? Oh, that's not a question. That's technically an exclamation mark. Thank you. That's all right. Over to Damien.
Anyone? Well, yeah. Thank you so much, George. Are there any questions from the floor here in Brisbane? I think there's a collective sense of overwhelmment, if that's not even a word, overwhelmishness has descended upon us, George. That was absolutely fantastic. I think that everybody is super mindful of the ticking clock and the impending arrival of many students and many spreadsheets to finish. Tasks are mounting up as we sit here. So that's absolutely brilliant, George. Thank you so much. But my instinct is telling me that we're going to wrap it up. Why not? Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. And thanks to Alan and the team, facilities here and facilities globally who make the magic happen. Hooray! And I'll be around for a couple of hours should you deem to speak to me. And thanks, everybody. Okay, thanks all.
Wonderful. That was fantastic. Thank you, everyone who presented. Thanks to our wonderful facilities team, audio and FTV up the back here that makes this all very seamless. That was a really great program from Damien and Sue-Ann. I also want to thank Sam McLean, our campus operations manager, who worked really hard on pulling this all together as well. I won't keep you any longer. I know lunch is downstairs. So we're going to go on break for lunch for about an hour, and then you'll break off into your departmental meetings with your heads of department. Lunch is in the student lounge downstairs, so I hope I'll get to see you all down there. Yes, yeah, the heads of department.